If you study the American combat record long enough, a pattern jumps out that rarely makes its way into popular documentaries. Not all units in the United States military fought the same war. Some were thrown into the fire early, survived campaign after campaign, and kept fighting long after most formations rotated out or shattered under the pressure. These weren't just famous divisions, they were the workhorses of the American war effort, units that absorbed the longest stretches of combat, assignments across multiple theaters, and the brutal grinding tempo that defined the global conflict. Whether you're a serious, if you study enough field reports from the 1939 to 1945 period, you eventually hit strange footnotes that don't fit the traditional narratives, little fragments buried in engineering logs or quartermaster memos. One of the strangest comes from a set of Allied materials tests describing an anti-penetrative compound added directly into paint, brushed onto ordinary timber, and somehow turning that timber into something dangerously close to bulletproof. It wasn't a miracle shield. It didn't stop tank rounds or heavy machine gun fire, but for the purposes soldiers needed, resisting shrapnel, slowing pistol fire, and preventing splintering that caused more injuries than the rounds themselves, this obscure mixture became one of the quiet, forgotten innovations of the entire war. The trick hinged on a wartime priority. How do you harden soft materials quickly, cheaply, and without industrial machinery? Timber was everywhere, in bridges, bunkers, crates, radio huts, and even armored mock-ups used to deceive enemy reconnaissance, but untreated wood was a liability. It cracked, it splintered explosively under pressure, and its hit reaction was unpredictable, so Allied chemists dug into a simple idea: load the paint itself with a compound capable of penetrating the wood's grain structure and crystallizing inside it, turning each board into a semi-rigid composite. The substance was silica, not uncommon, not exotic, but used in a way that surprised even experienced engineers. Finely powdered amorphous silica, mixed into a thick solution of linseed oil-based paint, produced what field manuals called glass loading. When brushed onto raw timber, the solution seeped deep into the pores. The first units to report success with it were engineers in the Pacific. Japanese troops routinely used 7.7mm Arisaka rifles against American positions, and the splinter injuries among Marines reinforcing wooden revetments were severe. After the adoption of glass-loaded paint, the number of shrapnel-induced infections dropped sharply. Field hospitals noticed it before the ordnance inspectors did. There were fewer embedded fragments from broken planks, and fewer amputations caused by septic splinter wounds. The boards did not stop bullets cleanly, but just a single coat reduced penetration. Now 3 to 4 coats meant pistol rounds could actually bury themselves without exiting, and, more importantly, without blowing the wood apart. The British took the idea further, applying it not only to defensive structures but also to vehicle add-ons. Certain reconnaissance units in Italy brushed the mixture onto the interior walls of soft-skinned carriers and supply trucks, not because it made them armatorisuri disin, endan der, inana danstrotser, inandor, indidand, indesin troder on tron, de fretsein, perseri dictenan, endan dobi ar domsein perseinsen, endan kamstan, bokderba, endan oder dansfreg as it stopped spalling. A grazing hit from a German MG-34 could shred unreinforced wood like paper, sending needle-sharp fragments into the crew, but after treatment, the same hit left a dented wall but, a living driver. The process was easy enough that it spread through informal channels. Commanders didn't always wait for supply authorization. If a unit could source powdered silica, sometimes even by crushing surplus glass, they mixed it directly into whatever oil-based coating they had. Some engineering officers documented the exact mix ratios, others relied on rule-of-thumb improvisation. It worked because the underlying principle was simple: raise the internal density of the wood faster than the grain can absorb impact force. It wasn't perfect science. It didn't have to be. It was practical, field-ready chemistry in the middle of a global conflict. Today, the closest modern equivalent is the penetration-resistant coatings used in certain construction and law enforcement applications. But the World War II version teaches a broader lesson about durability. You don't need exotic materials to radically change how a structure behaves. A survivalist or builder can apply the same principle today. If you're constructing an outdoor shed, a livestock pen, or even a defensive barrier on rural property, adding fine mineral particles to an oil-based sealant stiffens the wood dramatically. If you needed step-by-step guidance, it's straightforward. Start with unsealed timber. Mix fine silica or another inert micro-aggregate into a viscous oil finish. Brush in thin layers, allowing each to dry. The wood will grow heavier and harder with each pass. You won't turn it into armor, but you will drastically raise its resilience to impacts, tool strikes, and environmental damage. Some World War II historians argue this additive never mattered strategically. That's fair, it didn't win campaigns, but it saved fingers, eyes, and limbs, and it kept men in the fight who otherwise would have been pulled from the line. In a war of attrition, that counts more than most people realize. The test logs and medical records show its quiet impact, even if it never made it into the big documentaries. Like many field innovations, it lived between the lines, used by the units that needed it most and forgotten once steel and aluminum structures replaced wartime timber. But for those who study the war's technical undercurrent, the side of World War II where chemistry, improvisation, and desperation intersect, the bulletproof wood paint additive stands out. It's a reminder that some of the most interesting solutions weren't forged in factories, but mixed in muddy buckets beside forward positions, brushed onto rough boards under fire, and passed from one squad to the next because it simply worked. If you want more deep-cut World War II technology stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel, share the video with a fellow history enthusiast, and help keep these forgotten innovations alive.